Who would have thought in a year Joel Embiid has appendicitis, gets his appendix removed 3 weeks before the start of the NBA playoffs, a year in which Paul George faced a 25-game suspension, and you being the 7th seed going up against your most hated rival as the 2 seed. A year in which Jason Tatum returns for them and they look like the clear Eastern Conference favorite to come back from a 3-1 deficit and to beat that team for the first time in 42 seasons and put some past demons behind you. It was just a pleasure to watch, even though it got really tight at the end. But Tyrese Maxey put the squad on his back, and the Sixers finally have a signature playoff victory in the Joel Embiid era. And with a chance to continue their revenge tour, taking on the New York Knicks in the second round, and to continue and get past another hurdle of finally getting out of the second round and returning back to the Eastern Conference Finals. But man, just what a roller coaster of a series this was. Before the Embiid news, if you were to tell me that the Sixers get swept, honestly, I would not be shocked whatsoever. The fact that they took one in Boston in Game 2, I was really shocked by. And I really did think it was a series when Embiid returned, and boy, that Game 4 was really deflating. You know, the Celtics just come out, shoot the lights out in our building. I think they hit the franchise record for threes in a game. And I'm not going to lie, I thought the season was over right after that game because, you know, past Sixers teams have just rolled over and died when they face adversity like this. And you got to give the Sixers credit, man. And the first half of Game 5, it looked like they were fighting an uphill battle, but it wasn't like they were giving up. I felt like it was just shots weren't falling. You know, Celtics hit some tough shots, but that locker room adjustment for Game 5, I want to know what was said in that locker room because the end of the third, I think there was around 2 minutes left in the third quarter and into the fourth. The defensive intensity of the Sixers absolutely just changed this series. And the sequence by Quentin Grimes in the end of the third quarter, I think it was off a possession where Joel Embiid kicked it out on a double team, hits a three, you know, ball deflected out of bounds, and then just an absolute lock-up sequence against Jaylen Brown. Knocks the ball into the backcourt, picks up 60 feet away from the rim, plays good, strong defense, does not let Jaylen Brown get by him, forces him into like a little bit of a grifty jump shot, just absolutely clings. And then staring down to the bench, that's the sequence that I remember at the end of that game specifically. And then Joel Embiid just absolutely dominating the Celtics bigs, carrying the Sixers offense, just absolutely blew them out in the fourth quarter. I think they held them to 13 points in the fourth. I think the Celtics missed their last 17 shots. And then Game 6, Philly, the place was absolutely electric. For the Sixers to play their best defensive game probably in 20 years or so, that was just incredible. And the sequence from that game that I remember, it was the Joel Embiid baseline cut, Kelly Oubre behind the back pass. Next Boston possession, Jaylen Brown blows by Kelly Oubre. Joel Embiid comes over for the help defense. Kelly recovers the block off the backboard. It really was just everything great about the Sixers and what you picture them with their entire starting five. But Reese pushes the ball off the long rebound, hits PG for the head-to-head pass, behind the back to VJ for the slam. That place was absolutely electric, and that's the sequence of this series that I'm always going to remember. That being the particular turning point. And then for the Sixers, just absolutely lock down the Celtics, force Jason Tatum, force Jaylen Brown to beat them with strong contested twos, and really forcing them to really work for every single bucket while absolutely denying everyone else in this series. The defensive game plan from Nick Nurse and the players just taking accountability, staying in front of their man, and not drifting off ball. It really just changed everything. And then, of course, Game 7, everything happens like it does. I will say the defense at the end, I felt like they were just running on fumes, and the Celtics certainly got off some good looks. And I won't lie, I say if that Pritchard 3 or that White 3, the Jaylen Brown 3 at the top of the key, if those fall, it might be a different game, but it's finally just the Sixers caught a break. So many times they've had the cold streak where they just couldn't get the lid off the basket in recent playoff runs, and it finally just worked to their advantage. And Tyrese Maxey, man, closing out that game. And to me, the offense really was stalling for the majority of the fourth. It was a lot of just mismatch hunting and players exhausted. Joel Embiid just standing on the perimeter for the most part. Paul George trying to take advantage of post-up mismatches where he really had a lot of success during the series, but, credit the Boston defense. They played him well at the end there. But really the key matchup was putting Keita in that pick and roll and having Joel in the corner, noticing that Keita was not on Joel. I think they put Jalen on him, just forcing. They really wanted Joel to try and force that matchup, and he certainly took advantage of that matchup at times. But towards the end, you could see he was just aching, standing in the corner, playing on the perimeter, and putting Kelly in the pick and roll, forcing Keita to defend Maxey, and for Maxey to just use his speed. There really wasn't a time in this game where Maxey was getting deep paint penetration on any touches, but he just saved it towards the end. And boy, did the Sixers need those buckets because their offense was absolutely stalling, and Maxey absolutely closed this game for them. Really, it's something that the Sixers haven't had during the entire Embiid era, I would say, was someone to help him kind of close out games. The closest you could say was probably Jimmy Butler. But that was a different team at a different place, a young team where they still were learning to really try and win or, just gaining playoff experience against a really good Raptors team. But for Maxey to come up like he did, for Embiid to have the legacy game that he did, for Paul George to have this series, just both sides of the floor, defensively, what he did with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum for the majority of the series, man, and for him to be as efficient as he was on the offensive end, it really just showed why the Sixers got playoff P, and it really was just a joy for him to watch. And as someone who's loved Paul George, obviously last year I made the video signing PG. It really just felt good to see that, and that's why they got him. For his defensive intensity, I don't care what anyone says, he's still one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. He's still a good offensive player. He might not be that superstar he once was, but for him to have the efficient series that he did and show the glimpses of the superstar that he once was when the Sixers needed him to carry offenses sets. It was like game 2, stepping up in those type of games. But also in the minutes where Maxey was sitting and Embiid was not on the floor, for him to be that number one option and hit tough contested twos time after time again in this series, it really just shows he really played the perfect role for what he is right now. We know he's not going to be that superstar that he once was, but he played as well as he could have in this series, and he made such a great impact. It really just shows why the Sixers got him. And VJ, for a rookie to do this in a Game 7, just incredible. Up and down series for him offensively. Obviously, three-point shot this series really was not there. In the 2 games that he really went off in, it was because the Celtics were leaving him absolutely wide open. And for the games 3, 4, where he doesn't make a 3, the Sixers simply just they lost every game where VJ did not make a 3. And they won every game where he did make a 3. So that's pretty telling, but for him to just have the calmness to settle into this game, a Game 7, and hit jumpers when he has been struggling from the perimeter for most of the series, it really just shows that he's going to be a rising star in this league. He's played well all season long. He's been on the floor for the majority of the season, taking his bumps and bruises and just gaining experience, whether it's, commanding the offense, being the ball handler, finding his role, how he's going to be scoring that midi, that step-back midi is so pure, the three-point shooting, where he really has been consistent all season long. This was probably the most time where his shot really fluctuated. There was that 2-week stretch where he really struggled to find that three-point shot during the season, but he got back on track. And this was probably the worst his jumper looked all season long. And he still stuck with it. He never lost confidence in it. And for them to pull out this series like they did, 3-1 comeback, it puts a lot of things into perspective, and all the past demons that they had, the Hawks series, the multiple Celtics losses, the Heat losses, where it seems like they just crumbled down the stretch, for them to finally overcome that hurdle and to do it like they did, and for it to be the Celtics that they did it against. It meant a lot. And this really was a legacy series for a lot of players. Embiid obviously has had some playoff moments, but he never had that true signature moment, and he had some playoff failures in the past, but he had a great overall series, averaged 28, 9, and 7. 7 assists. I think there was a stat where he had like 28 assists in this series to only 8 turnovers, by far the best turnover to assist ratio in his career in the playoffs. And he really just looked like that heliocentric offense, the hub of the offense. He could facilitate, he could score when needed. And there were times this series where he was missing shots that he normally makes. And he still fought through it, still made plays, Him and Kelly on those cuts, they just seem to be intertwined. And Kelly Oubre had a great series as well. Obviously, the shooting numbers weren't there. He was 4-25 from 3. But every other facet of the game, like I said before with Paul George, just what he did with Jaylen Brown for the majority of the series, really forced every bucket to be difficult. There's nothing like Kelly Oubre getting an offensive foul and, first down the other way. Absolutely just beautiful things to watch like that. And this really has been one of my favorite Sixers teams of this era, and has a bunch of players that I really like, a bunch of players who play well on defense, still have an offensive game. Quentin Grimes being the only one off the bench. It's crazy. The Sixers scored 109 points last night, and they had 3 bench points. So that's pretty crazy. We're going to need more from the bench. Obviously, against the Knicks, I think you're going to have to go deeper into the rotation. It was a Game 7, but you can't have everyone play 40-plus minutes. And, it's going to be a different series against the Knicks. But for the Sixers to just pull this one out, and I know there's memes saying that this is the Sixers finals. It really does feel like it. And it almost makes up for everything in the past for them to accomplish this goal. But, they still got more playoff games, which is crazy to say, because it really does feel like it really did feel like this is the final chapter. But, the revenge tour continues. Round 2 against the New York Knicks. I'm probably going to be making a video pretty soon about that. Hopefully you get it done by tomorrow before the game. Really sucks that this couldn't have been a Tuesday game instead of a Monday. Really be able to sit on this win a little bit longer. But the Sixers are moving on to the second round against the New York Knicks. Have a chance to put more demons behind them. Revenge tour continues. And to the Celtics, fuck them all.